Hello, everybody. So, I wanted to come on tonight and talk about Karen Reed and how much she had to drink the night that she was at the waterfall. I had my thoughts on this before, and after listening to her, what I'll call testimony, because essentially that's what it is, it's her testimony because it's been allowed as evidence into court. After listening to her testimony about how much she drank, I definitely have some thoughts, and I have some other things people might not be aware of when it comes to what it means to be, drunk. So let's just take a listen to her testimony first for anybody who hasn't heard it.
And it's the level of intoxication putting out here for everybody. It's happy. Yeah. It's do that last year, right? I would say I have like a warm up. Was it like a vodka tonic every 40 minutes? Okay. And so are you feeling like buzzed? And I'm not judging. I'm just trying to get buzzed. Yeah.
Clip 9, please.
The final count of my alcohol intakes, probably about 5 or 6 or 4. The drinks that they reported me at McCarthy's, which is where I consumed most of the alcohol, was the weakest vodka tonic. It tasted just like old soda water with lime. Not that I needed it to be a martini, but it might have had a splash of vodka in it. So I said, John, this drink tastes like it has no vodka in it. He said, just get a shot and mix it yourself. So each drink was being counted as a double. So I would get a vodka tonic and then I would pour a shot into it, so that counts too. Frankly, it just felt like a regular cocktail. It was just a really weak pour, so I asked for a shot. So for my taste, it just tasted like that's the normal strength of what a drink should be. So I had maybe 2 or 3 that are being counted as 4 and 6, and I don't know. I felt fine. I felt like I was buzzed. And then there was one drink, the last one that was given to me, which I would have counted as 3, but they're counting as a 6 cocktail. The guys that were with brought around shots and making one that I didn't drink, but I poured in my drink. So that's now my 5th and 6th drinks with the 7th, which is the shot that all the men did, and I poured it. So that one glass that I'm holding that I go into the waterfall with has 3 drinks in it. A vodka tonic and 2 shots. And which is why John said to me, you're not leaving that drink here. Like, you haven't touched it and just poured a bunch of vodka. Like, just take it with you, which is something he always did. So then I go into waterfall and I put that drink down and I would socialize most of the time. So that would have been my 5th, 6th, and 7th drinks. Then John orders me to drink the waterfall that I don't drink, that he takes with him. And then there was a round of shots that Chris Albert bought that I did take. So that would have been the night. But I did not consume 9 vodka martinis or take 9 shots, depending on how you count it. And the last 2 drinks I didn't touch.
Clip 10, please.
And I'm not as clear as I would be if I hadn't been drinking. I mean, I've had drinks, so, and that led me to question, like, could I have hit him? Did I barber his foot or hit him in the knee? Did I incapacitate him? I mean, I always drive with my music blasting ever since I was 16, and I know when John got out of the car to go to Fairview, I know my car was blasting because when I got in it, the next morning I looked for him, I had to immediately turn it down. And I don't know, it's stormy. I have had a few cocktails. I didn't black out, but I wasn't as lucid as I would have been if I had gone to bed.
All right. So hold on. I just want to stop that now. So, you have to be honest about what you're seeing, right? And I will just say this. I don't know for sure, but from the way that Karen Reed is describing the amount of drinks she had and stuff like that, she sounds like somebody who drinks. There are people who drink, and then there are people who don't drink. And then there are people who can never drink, right? So the people who drink are those kind of people. She's sitting there giving you calculations as to how she figured out in her mind how many drinks she had. Even if she was given 6 drinks, right? They didn't count as drinks because they didn't taste like what she's accustomed to. So people who drink vodka in particular, and I know this from my own personal experience, want to taste the vodka. And if you don't taste the vodka, then there's not enough in there. And it's usually people who drink. They have a high tolerance. It doesn't mean that they're an alcoholic, although I was an alcoholic when I was like that. Only I was, there's varying degrees, obviously. But the point I'm trying to make is I can relate, girl. I'm listening to her tell this story and I'm like, I would have said the exact same story back when I used to drink. So, and I wasn't always a problem drinker. It just became one. I think people who drink all know that the way she's talking is their language, right? And so I thought that was, I think, from my perspective, it still doesn't necessarily mean that she drove drunk. And even though that may sound crazy to some people, it's because it's the way that the law is set up, right? With the DUIs. And I understand why it's set up that way, because too many people have lost loved ones in drunk driving accidents. And I don't condone that. And I don't think it's okay to do that or anything like that. But I'm attacking a different piece of the argument, which is, what do we define as driving while drunk, driving drunk, right? And there are people, that you can calculate based on a drink per hour, say, or whatever that thing is, that you'll be okay to drive and you'll be under the quote legal limit, and not drunk or impaired. Okay. These are all subjective things. All of these things are just not arbitrarily made up, but they're subjective, meaning I don't think that one person blowing a 0.01 is going to be the same as another person. People have tolerances, and your body doesn't necessarily reflect that. So when I worked in the ER, I had people come in all the time. They were typically regulars because they lived out on the streets, and they would have a blood alcohol. The highest one I ever saw, and I never forget it because it was over 500, and I didn't think you could live if your body is over 50% alcohol, but apparently you can, because this person had a 640. 640. I mean, that's beyond. Now, this wasn't a blood. It was a breathalyzer, but they were able to do a breathalyzer. And anybody else with a 640 that doesn't drink on like a daily regular basis, since they were maybe 8 or something, I don't know, they're going to die from that amount of alcohol, right? So we would have people come in, but that was obviously a very that was unusual. We didn't usually get 640s, but I'll tell you, we got 300s all the time. We just ended up calling them that. It's really 0.300, but we would just say a 300 for that, or 400. I saw tons of 3 and 400s all the time. And then sometimes people would come in with a 180, a 0.180, and they seemed just as intoxicated. In other words, you couldn't base the person's ability to operate a vehicle, walk, function, talk, whatever, solely on their blood alcohol content. You can't do that. And in fact, you can't do that when you work in an emergency department where there's something called, quote, clinically sober. Okay. So in the emergency department, so when you're driving on the road and you're intoxicated, the law gives you a legal limit that you have to be under, or legally you'll be considered intoxicated to drive, right? When you go into the emergency department, they have a different set of standards, and that is, are you clinically sober? Okay. And this was another really interesting thing that happens in emergency departments, where a lot of, homeless come in, or just alcoholics come in and things like that. When the person comes in and their blood alcohol is 300 and they just got picked up off the street because they were sleeping in a spot they shouldn't be in, or they were causing some kind of commotion, and they come in, we basically monitor them until they become sober. But sober is not 0. You can't take a person who is an alcoholic and get them down to 0 and expect them not to have a seizure. And so this is something that they learned a long time before I started working there. So what happens is, as they come down in their alcohol content, every hour or so you go over and you breathalyze them again. Sometimes some people wouldn't breathalyze them again because they weren't going to base their decision on if the person was sober or not on their blood alcohol content. And so you would let them sleep it off, and a couple hours goes by and you just go over and talk to them. And the times I did breathalyze, they were so high. They might be 180 if they came in at 400, or they might be at 230, but they were fine. Like, they were walking, they were coherent, they could probably pass the sobriety test if they ever could. I mean, it just, they were fine. They were, quote, clinically sober. Okay. And there are a lot of people out there like that. And there's a lot of people that drive on the road that are driving, quote, clinically sober. Okay. I'm not saying I'm endorsing any type of drunk driving. All right. So just please don't misunderstand what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that her sort of talking about these drinks and stuff it really gave me the impression that she's a drinker, which doesn't mean she's an alcoholic, but that she's a drinker. Because that was a lot of talk about like how many drinks you had. And it's too bad because I think, people on the jury, especially if they know anybody or they just are very sensitive to that specific issue, are not going to like hearing that. But at the end of the day, it still in no means implicates her in the death of John O'Keefe. It simply doesn't. I think this is just like a separate issue than the trial of his murder by her vehicular manslaughter, I guess, or whatever you want to call it. I think the drinking piece is something that's very separate. And I just wanted to speak on it. And I have no judgment, obviously. I mean, I said, I had a problem and I stopped 7 years ago, but it's, and I'm not saying she has a problem. I'm just saying that is going to be portrayed to people who are non-drinkers, because people who don't drink, they would know exactly how many drinks they had. They'd be like, oh yeah, I had 2 and then I felt a little woozy, or, oh, I didn't drink because I was going to drive that night, or, oh, I never drink. I only drink on holidays. I mean, there's so many people out there like that. And then there's people like me and Karen Reed who drink. And when they take a drink and it doesn't taste like there's vodka in it, are like, what the fuck? And yeah, you buy a shot and you pour it in there. Totally. And it's not a double. It's not a double because you just got a shitty watered down drink to begin with. But people who don't drink aren't going to understand that. To them, that sounds like this person has a fucking problem. And that's the issue. I think a lot of people drink in that area, though, like in the Northeast and Boston. I mean, when I lived up near there, it was crazy town. A lot of drunks everywhere. I was one, so no shame. So yeah, it's a culture up there. It's a culture. So hopefully the jury understands what she was saying, because it's taken out of context, obviously. And she's being honest. She still doesn't think she killed him. She still knows she didn't kill him. She still didn't kill him, she's just being honest. And that might be it's actually her greatest strength, because I don't think it's ever a flaw to be honest. It's always better to just be yourself and be honest. Creating a whole other persona to operate in certain areas, first of all, it's exhausting. And secondly, we're already trying to figure out what we're doing here. So anyway, major tangent. Hope you guys enjoyed it. And free Karen Reed, free Turtle Boy. And I'm probably going to be going up there once the defense starts to put on their case in chief.